She tortured this 3-year-old boy and right after just went straight to sleep. Keith Horton, a Tennessee father of four, worked long hours to provide for his family. And being that he worked long hours, he would often rely on family members to be able to watch his children when he had to work. Now, Keith had a girlfriend named Dominica, and they had three children together. But he also had a 3-year-old that was from a previous relationship, and it seemed that Dominica didn't mind watching him when he had to go to work, or so he thought. There were instances when Keith's son Kevin would go to other family members' houses after being with Dominica, and he would show up with small scratches and bruises. And although kids can be clumsy and tend to trip over themselves from time to time, they started to question if it was one of these instances or if something else was going on. So they decided that they would watch him more closely. In November of 2025, Keith would be assigned a 16-hour work shift that would span the duration of the night into the early morning, and so he would ask Dominica was it okay for her to watch Kevin while he was working. Now, he picked Kevin up from his aunt's house after having a great time with his cousins and then would bring him to Dominica. So Dominica agreed to watch Kevin, and so Keith dropped him off and said his goodbyes. But what he didn't know was that this would be the last time that he would be able to do so, because just a few hours before his shift was about to end, Dominica would call him and tell him something that would absolutely crush him. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, Dominica would call Keith to tell him that his 3-year-old son Kevin was dead. Not sick, not heading to the hospital, but dead. She went on to say that Kevin was actually not feeling well around the time that she was trying to put him to sleep and that he was throwing up. However, when he finally was able to go to sleep, he did not wake up and she found him cold and unresponsive. Now, as a father, this really angered Keith because he wanted to know why she wouldn't have called him when Kevin was throwing up in the first place. Not to mention, when Kevin left his aunt's house, he was in perfectly fine condition. Keith immediately left work and came home, and when he did, Dominica was standing outside of the house while EMS was inside where Kevin was. When he got in the house, he then saw his son laying on the floor, purple and stiff. He also noticed something else. Kevin was completely covered in bruises. Unfortunately, EMS was unable to do anything for Kevin, being that he was already dead when they got there. Now, the family was devastated to hear that Kevin was dead, especially when he was perfectly fine before leaving his aunt's house. They automatically did not believe Dominica's story about him being sick and then dying throughout the middle of the night, especially when they already had suspicions due to previous bruises and scars. Now, Dominica, who had not been arrested at this point, would take to Facebook to try to clear her name, stating that she loved Kevin as her own, and she didn't think it was fair that people were blaming her for his death when he wasn't feeling good when he got in her care. But none of that would matter because all of the family's suspicions would be validated when the autopsy report came out and detailed the horrific truth about what happened that night. Outside of the fact that Kevin's body was completely littered with bruises and cuts, he also had contusions to the forehead, cheek, and chin, ranging from about 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch. In addition to this, he also had bruising and blood inside of his mouth, along with severe burn inside of his ear and on his genitals. It was also noted that he had lacerations to his liver and internal bleeding in his stomach. Now armed with this evidence, police would then go and arrest Dominica, and investigators would question her as to what happened that night. Originally, she tried to hold on to the story that she concocted, but eventually she would come out with the truth. She told investigators that sometime during the night, she would take her lit Black and Mild and put it out inside of Kevin's ear. Now, when the pain and shock caused him to urinate on himself, that is when she became enraged. She then went on to say at that point, she took her lighter and began burning his private parts with the lighter. And when he wouldn't stop crying and screaming in pain, she then began to hit him with an open and closed fist on his torso and his chest. After he fell to the ground in complete agony, she then began to kick and stomp on him. She stomped on him full force with the heel of her boot, a 3-year-old boy, and that was the point at which they believe his liver was lacerated. Instead of taking Kevin to the hospital or calling anyone, Dominica would not do anything remotely close to that. In fact, she told investigators that she believed he died right there, but instead of getting him help, she just went to sleep. She then waited to the next morning around 3 a.m. to call 911 and then Kevin's father, but by then it was far too late. Kevin had already succumbed to his injuries and died. Now, investigators would ask Domenica if she thought that there was a chance that he could have survived had she taken him to the hospital, and her response was possibly, potentially. Domenica was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated child neglect, and is currently being held on a $1 million bond awaiting sentencing. My condolences to the family of Kevin Horton. May he rest in peace. Let me know your thoughts on this case, and as always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.